Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ted Patterson's Power BI Dev Camp. Today, our topic is integrating Azure Active Directory, business to customer or business to consumer, depending on what your definition is, with App Owns Data Embedding. Ted, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Hope everyone's doing well out there in Power BI Dev Camperland.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, please take it away.
Hey, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well today. So what we're going to look at today is, how to integrate with Azure Active Directory, B2C, the business to consumer. So what I did over the last month is kind of do a deep dive into kind of seeing how this would fit with an App Owns Data Embedding project, and kind of the results and outcome was it fits really well. So I wanted to kind of go through, and a lot of what we're going to do is provide an introductory, so you can understand what Azure AD B2C is, how it differs from Azure AD. But then we're going to go through, a lot of useful, tips and techniques, to allow you to actually use it in a production application. Now, what we're going to look at today, is we're going to start with just an overview section, looking at the architecture, and then we want to actually build something. So there's something called a user flow, and we'll look at, and I'll do demos, as far as getting started, building user flows to do things like sign up or sign in a user. As we get later in the session, we'll get into some deeper developer details. We're going to talk about, once you've created all the stuff in Azure AD B2C, how do you program against it to get access tokens? So we're going to look at using the best practice of msal-browser.js for SPA applications. And, as we get into it, the last three are going to be, deeper developer sections. Hopefully, everything will be very interesting and exciting. Okay, now let's go ahead and kind of start with, what is Azure B2C? So you have Azure AD. That's the thing that authenticates the users within your company and, controls user identity and permission lists and the enforcement of, access to Azure resources. But it's for kind of a controlled environment. And one of the problems with Azure AD is there's lots of potential users out there, that you can't reach. So think of Azure AD B2C as the internet, identity provider. Something that is going to allow you to reach the, maximum amount of humans on the earth. And so what we'll see here is that, if a user has a social media account, they could just use that, and we'll kind of work out how to federate, that identity, into, our solution. Or if they don't have an account, but they have an email address, they can create a local account and sign up. So what's really neat about Azure AD, I remember a decade back in the SharePoint world, there'd be solutions for forms-based identity. This is kind of like that. The idea that someone has to have a database where they keep the users and manage credentials. And what's great is it's all done behind the scenes, and very transparent to you. And you're going to see that as we go through. Now, as we keep moving through these slides here, what you're going to see is that Azure AD B2C, I have to keep using the full name, but it's what the industry terms as a customer identity and access management solution. So we have plenty of others out there, in the industry that many of our customers use, OneLogin, Auth0, Ping, Okta. So what I want to do to start out with, is let's compare Azure, B2C to the regular Azure AD that we usually call it Azure AD, but we could call it Azure AD B2B. Even that's kind of implicit inside there. But the B2C layer is much different because it's really kind of meant for this far reach and to allow users to kind of sign up, without any type of human interaction or approval. Now, it's going to support federating to things like Facebook and LinkedIn, so we can bring in external identities, creating local accounts. So it's going to provide, all this, just as a service, which is part of Azure. Now, one gotcha is that, if you have a typical Azure AD account, you can create an access token for it to talk to the, the Power BI REST API or the Microsoft Graph API, and you can give that user permissions in SharePoint. Well, that doesn't work for these type of users that we're going to refer to as consumer users. So the idea is that Azure AD B2C does one thing, the authentication, but it doesn't do the second thing you might want it to do, which is the authorization part. Now, let's look at a typical app owns data embedding solution. Okay, so we have this single page application, an SPA client, and we can't call directly from there into Power BI. So we have our web API in the middle, and that's what talks to the Power BI REST API. Now, with app owns data solutions, Power BI doesn't know who the users are. They're external. So then what we're going to have to do is create our own database so we can track things like the tenants that contain our Power BI reports, the users who are using the system, and something to connect it to, some type of permissions table strategy that we have. We're able to set access control lists. And there's two types of authentication we have to worry about. The first one is, how does the web API talk to the Power BI REST API? And that's, by creating an Azure AD account for a service principal and connecting as that. And that's something you should absolutely do, connect as a service principal. But it's also absolutely not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the other side. How do we connect this client to the web API? And, one of the beauty marks of Power BI embedding is that you can choose, whatever identity provider that you want. So we have plenty of customers that they come in and the requirement is they have to use Ping. That's no problem. And one thing is, this identity provider in an app owns data solution really has to do one thing, pass an access token that has the ID of the user, and everything else you can kind of have in the database. So maybe one company, decides to use Ping, another company's using Okta, maybe another one's using OAuth. So once again, if your requirement is to use a specific authentication provider, the Power BI embedding and platforms like, sure, go ahead, use it. But what if you get to this point and you want app owns data, but you're not sure what to use, and you're kind of looking and starting to investigate different identity providers? That's where Azure AD B2C becomes a really good fit. So what we'll see is that Azure AD B2C fits in perfectly with an app owns data solution. Because ultimately, with an app owns data solution, you basically need to implement the authorization layer. Track users, track Power BI artifacts, create embed tokens that kind of set permissions for users. But you need help with authentication. So there's Azure AD B2C that does what it does well. It authenticates the user and lets us manage that, those accounts and the user identity. It doesn't do authorization, but we don't need it. Okay, here's my one cheesy bit for today. App owns data, we see that there's just a really good fit here because the two complement one another. Okay, now as we, drill inside here, what I want to do here is to kind of step through how things are going to work. So we have Azure AD B2C is going to play the role of an identity provider. And the idea is that, you're an application developer. Now, we're going to use a special term here, relying party. And that's a term that, all the security geeks use as we're kind of talking about these security protocols. But your application, the relying party, is going to, begin, by calling to the identity provider and basically getting an access token. And then once we get the access token, your application is then going to transmit that access token, each time it calls that web API. Now, let's look at more detail of how Azure B2C tenants work. So in that Azure B2C tenant, there is an authority. That's the thing that has endpoints. It's a service, that you can redirect a user to in the browser, that starts, what we kind of think of as an authentication flow. Now, in addition to this authority, there also has to be a policy store. So we want to, create different endpoints for authorization. So what we're going to do is we're going to create multiple policies, and we can create a policy the easy way with the user flow, or the hard way with a custom policy, But either way, those policy definitions get, saved into this policy store so they can be loaded, as users, begin, to, start authenticating against these policies. Now, we support the idea of account federation. And the idea is that you can have a policy that allows the user, to sign into a social media account, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, live.com. Those are the three, I'm going to use in my demo today. So you'll find it's very easy, to integrate these social media accounts. We have to create an app, over in the social media platform like LinkedIn. And then we configure, things inside of the BTC tenant. And then we just basically can, configure them declaratively. There's also enterprise accounts. So maybe I want to authenticate the user to go to, whatever Microsoft Azure AD domain is your company's, primary domain. Now, one thing I'll point out about enterprise accounts is that you can set it up for Azure AD. You can set it up for other things like Salesforce. Just about anything, that's compliant with OpenID Connect and OAuth 2, you'll be able to integrate in. But this is more heavy lifting. So it's not going to be till we get to the custom policies at the end of this session, that I'm going to show you, how to integrate enterprise accounts, like an Azure AD tenant. There's also local accounts. And what's kind of really neat about this picture is your application doesn't care. It says, give me an access token. And whether it's just something simple that the tenant has to do or incredibly complicated, you just wait until the access token, is passed back to you. And all the complexity is kind of hidden on the backside of that B2C policy. Okay, now let's go ahead and do something, explicit. So what we want to do is kind of step through how do we create a new Azure AD B2C tenant. And the first thing that you'll need is you'll need a subscription. So now you need just a regular Azure AD tenant. And I'm just going to use the one I use for Power BI DevCamp, and you need a subscription. And those two things are going to allow you to go into the Azure portal and say, give me one of these new tenants. And when you do, it's going to create this on the fly. And what you'll see is your tenant has its own name that identifies it as a resource. So Power BI DevCamp auth.onmicrosoft.com. And there's also a second URL, Power BI DevCamp auth.b2clogin.com, and that is the primary URL they use, for their endpoint. And it creates the policy store, and it creates, a collection of users, of local and federated users. So once again, the process is to just go to your Azure subscription, and you're going to go ahead and choose create. And when you do that, you have to give it a name. And like many other things in Azure, if someone's already used the name, I always try George Clooney and Brad Pitt as names, and they never work because you all have stolen them from me. But the idea is you need something that is unique around the globe. Now, once you've kind of gotten this far, let's go back over here, and I'm going to jump into Azure. So here I am in my Power BI DevCamp tenant. This is not the B2C tenant, but what you can see is I have this resource right here, which is Power BI DevCamp auth, and I'll go ahead and open that. And the first thing you'll see here is you can't see very much, when you're in your main tenant. What we're going to have to do, let's go back over here, and there is a switch directory or switch tenant. And now I'm going to move from my main one, over to the Power BI DevCamp auth. Once I switch over there, and we go back to the, folder right here, what we're able to do is get to this, what I'm just going to call the Azure AD B2C portal. Now, like an Azure AD standard tenant, we can have app registrations. Now, I'm going to be talking about various apps as we go through here, but just to kind of call things out, there are many apps here that I only need for the development environment. So there is a custom B2C policy installer. When you're developing custom policies, utilities can basically shove your XML up in here if there's an app. We're going to see something called the token inspector, which is once again is kind of used for testing, not for production. And then there's an app that's going to allow me to use the Microsoft Graph API. there are two different apps right here that are only used once you start using custom policies. So I guess what I'm getting at is in a normal production tenant, there might only be a single SPA setup application, like we have right here that your users are going to use. Now, let's go back here. Now, here, I guess I'm being a little bit standoffish. Embrace the Azure AD B2C docs. And then I qualify it with only if success is important to you. So I found these docs completely essential as I went through and started getting up to speed on all aspects. And I find that the docs are pretty full featured, so I definitely encourage you to use them. One other thing as we finish this intro section, there's going to be a lot of links. There's the links to the PowerPoint slide deck I'm showing right now, and other documentation. So just up in the Power BI DevCamp portal at www.powerbidevcamp.net, there's a page for each session, and so just an easy place to get at the links. Okay, so enough of this conceptual banter, Ted. Let's get on to something fun and interactive. So let's actually build a policy. Now, I mentioned this before, but just to reinforce it. If you want to create a B2C policy, there are two ways: the easy way and the hard way. There's user flows, which is a UI-based experience, and then there's custom policies, which mean you're using Visual Studio Code and you're modifying, and then uploading XML files. So why would you choose user flows, over custom flows? First, because you're a human, not a developer. Okay, I'm a developer. I can make jokes about developers without any flashback on social media. They're much easier to use. So custom policies have a pretty steep learning curve. I can create a user flow with no knowledge of what is claims-based security or how we start building access tokens. There's no code required. Everything's configured by point and click in the UI. Well, why would you ever choose to use custom policy over user flows? So they're going to give you a lot more control over what's going on. In particular, what type of claims would you like to put in the email? In the solution I'm going to show at the end of today's session, I had to go to custom policies because I wanted any user, whether they have a local account, a LinkedIn account, they're coming from Azure AD, I want everyone to have an email claim, in their access token that I can use as the ID, into my backend. The other big thing is federation with enterprise accounts. I want you to be able to sign up and sign in to my application, using the work and school account that you use, in your day job. The last one here, if you look at the very bottom bullet point on the slide, merging accounts during sign up. So let's say that someone signs up via LinkedIn, and their email address is ted.pattison@microsoft.com. And then that same user, goes through Azure AD. What's going to happen is it's going to create two different identities, inside of Azure and two different accounts. Now, I haven't done this. This is very heavy lifting, but I see there's, definitely discussions that I found where people are kind of going through, and there's some samples that you can use, but the idea of just having a custom policy to automatically merge your accounts, is a pretty helpful feature. Okay, now the real, high level view is that if you want to use user flows, you're going to create this, click a couple check boxes, and go ahead and test. And we'll spend 5 minutes on how to do that. If you're creating custom policies, you're using Visual Studio and a bunch of developer tools. You're making small changes. You're uploading things, right into the B2C tenant, but only if they, pass the XML validation tests. So it's, certainly a much different experience. Okay, now let's go ahead, and when we want to work with user flows, first of all, we're going to go to the portal, and we're going to click on user flows in the left nav, and we're going to click on new user flow. Now, I've pre-created a bunch of user flows for the coding demo I'm going to show, but let's just kind of create a new flow from scratch. And what you'll see is that when you get to the first page, it's going to say, would you like the policy that you're creating to be a sign up and sign in policy, maybe a sign in or a sign up. What I found is that I really just liked having a single sign up, sign in policy. It reduces complexity, give users what they need. But if you need to break out so that you want to bring up a dialogue for the user to only sign in or to force sign up, you can do that as well. Now, down below, this is something where I can advise you, should you use the recommended one or the other one? Use the recommended one. There's an old legacy style that if you don't know what it means, don't worry about it. And then we're going to go ahead and click create. Now, once we do that, we get to this very nice page to configure our user flow. And just for an example, if I wanted to go to the user flow and look at properties, I can turn on multi-factor authentication. I can set conditional access. So, if you're in the local network, multi-factor authentication is not necessary. But if you're not in a LAN, or if we detect you're not coming from this country, we can turn on MFA. You can control token lifetimes. So by default, tokens live for 60 minutes. Refresh tokens can be cached for 14 days. But you can make those shorter or longer. There's also some things with claims compatibility. For instance, there is, when we look at the access token, I'll point this out later. It's something where historically we've kind of used one name for a claim, for something like the identity provider, which is ACR. And now the way things are moving, we're kind of going over to a new one, which is, TFP for Trust Framework Policy. And then sometimes you might have code that's already written for one way or the other. So it just kind of gives you a quick way to switch. And then finally, there's some things for session behavior, or do I want to support, password reset? Okay, so at this point, we're going to create it. And, after we create it, we're going to test the user flow. And this gets to be kind of really simple, because what we can do is click on run user flow, and then it brings up a form where you can just kind of start it right up. And what's going to happen is that you can now test the sign in. Can't test sign in, we don't have the users yet. Oh, let's go ahead and start by testing the sign up process. And so as I do my demo, what you're going to see is, I'm going to put in a user email, and then what's going to happen is that magically behind the scenes, the B2C tenant will automatically send that user an email, with the auth code. That auth code is now going to be taken and put back in, and now that user can continue through the process. And what we've seen is the user is just, inserted himself or herself, into our accounts store. And then at the very end, we want to look at the token. So there's this utility that Microsoft has called JWT.ms. And the one thing I'll point out is that, read the docs, but you have to create an Azure AD application, for this to work properly. Okay, so that all looks kind of fun. So let's go back here. Let's go to user flows, and I want to create the new user flow. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pick sign up and sign in. Take recommended, Ted. Okay, we'll take the recommended one. Now that we've gone inside here, we're going to go ahead and call, hello world. And what type? Now, I'm not going to get into beyond email sign up. You can get more advanced and have email and then add phone and get all kinds of neat multi-factor stuff. Let's keep it simple. We're just going to use email sign up right here. And now that we've created this, let's go back and we can open it up. Once again, there are a bunch of settings down here. I'm not going to take time to roll through this because we just did. But let's now keep going down here. So if I now go to identity providers, I'm not going to use one of these yet. There's user attributes. So this is kind of what things do you want to collect from the user? So we'll say basically, how about not display name yet? Let's start with given name and surname. We also have, so this is what we want to collect from the user attributes. Application claims, that's the thing that I want to put, into the access token. Okay, so now that we go here, let's say that inside the access token, we'll put an email addresses, given name, and surname. Okay, so we'll just kind of start with a couple properties, and we'll go ahead and click Save. I'll go back to the overview. Okay, now run user flow. So we'll come back here, and when we run the user flow right here, I'm going to pick this application. So you have to pre-create the application to use this, and the application has to be given specific permissions. But now we're going to reply back to this URL. So now what we're going to do is, let's go ahead and run this right here. And what I have right here is, I'm going to go back here for 1 second. And there's a bunch of users that I have inside there. But what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all these users right now. I should have done this before. So you're seeing what should be going on behind the curtains there in my demo. Okay, but now let's go ahead and kind of move back to where we were, inside of Azure. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to, run this user flow. Now, there's no account in there for this user. Actually, wait a second. This is kind of, that's a cube. What the heck is the cube? What's this blue stuff? What I think would be much better here before we even start this is let's go back outside of this user flow. Let's go to company branding and get this quick win. And so I'm going to create a new language. And as I create that new language, now I'm going to go up and, if I go into, basically the company branding, I want to use this as the background. I want to use, this, as my logo inside here. Let's go ahead and click Save. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go back and, get to our other program already in progress. And so this time we're going to run the user flow. And once again, I'm going to pick the token inspector, and then let's go ahead and run the user flow. And oh, that is so much better. So this whole idea that, you can just do a very simple, branding overlay makes it very easy. There's more advanced replacement of all the HTML and adding JavaScript behind these pages that I'm not going to get into in this session. But I do want to point out that that's available. If you did want to kind of take over, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript behind these pages, you can do that as well. Okay, let's continue along with our buddy Austin. Austin is, one of our people here, Power BI Dev Camp, and he wants to get signed up as a local account, so he gets sent a verification code. Okay, let's go back over here. And Austin is going to wait. He's a very impatient fellow. Maybe he's going to refresh. But what we should see, is pretty soon, and this usually comes within 5 seconds. We're going to see this particular code. Okay, now with that code, we're going to go back here. We're going to go ahead and verify the code. Okay, so now the BDC tenant says this guy, has a valid email address. So we're going to let him come up with, what the, password that this user wants to use. And then, remember under user attributes, I put in basically given name and surname. And so we'll go ahead and put that in, and then we'll go ahead and click on create. And the idea is that this is just kind of creating an account on the fly. Now, here's this little tool, which is called JWT. So that's a type of token, JavaScript web token. And the idea is that now you can kind of see exactly, what is going into the token inside here. So there is not an email claim, but an emails claim that has a collection, and you get a great guarantee that is going to contain, between 0 and more than 1 email. So one of the issues that we're going to have to kind of wrestle with later when we talk to custom policies is how do we change that into kind of a guaranteed email claim. So now that you kind of seen that first walkthrough, let's go back here, get back to my slides. And what I showed you there, was how to kind of do the simple branding, where you come up here and you add the logo inside there. And the one thing I'll point out is, try to stick with the measurements they give you and create, image files exactly of that size. Things worked out much better once I started following, what they told me to do. And once we've got that, now we've got our lovely branding. Okay, now let's go ahead and do one more thing here. So I want to go back here, and you kind of saw, how that worked. So let's now go back and under user attributes, let's go ahead and collect display name as well. We'll go ahead and save that. And once I have saved that, it takes a second to save. Now I'm going to go to application claims. So as an application developer, here are the claims or the verified facts that you can pull out of the access token. So let's go ahead and add in display name. We're already going to have identity provider. This thing, identity provider access token. What's that? I don't know. Let's add it. Looks good. Maybe the user's object ID. Let's go ahead and hit save. One more thing that I'll do here is let's go to properties. And if I go all the way down to the bottom, let's go ahead and choose, self-service password reset. That's something that we want. Maybe I'll pick in keep me signed in as well. Okay. And now that we've made just a couple changes, I just want to kind of show you the instant gratification, that we get. So back here, one more time, we'll kind of go through this process. This time we've got, keep me signed in. We can go ahead and sign in here. But there's also the forgot password link. Gosh, and then here's our buddy Austin one more time. Gosh, I couldn't remember my password. I just created it 5 minutes ago. So once again, he's going to come back here, and he's going to impatiently wait for this next email to come in. Now that it comes in, let's go ahead, grab that. Let's go back. If we can find the right place, it's right here. Now we're going to go ahead and verify the code. Great. This actually allows me to change the email to something else if I want, but all I want to do, is basically continue on, and I'm going to come up with a new password. Actually, that's the same as the old password. Come on, Ted. Okay, so once we get through this screen here, word 2, now, once again, it kind of pushes back there. We finally end up at the end here, but now let's look at things that we have. So, and that looks like it went through the wrong flow. There's actually 2 flows there. One was the flow I created, and then the other is the password reset flow. So what we're actually going to have to do one more time to kind of see these is let's go ahead and run this user flow, but this time we're just going to pick to sign in, and I'm going to use my updated password. And as we go through here, now, okay, now that I see it's taking a little time for those settings to set inside there that I put there. Okay, so we're not seeing that. Maybe we'll try one more time. What I'm trying to do is kind of see the things that we put, in the output claim there. So what I wanted to do is just kind of demo through. What I often find is you make changes, and if you're impatient and you run your test within a minute, the changes haven't propagated yet. Okay, let's see if that is the case. We'll try this one more time, to see if 3 times is a charm. And we'll go ahead and we'll sign in, and still not coming through. Okay. But the idea, is that we should be able to influence, what we see here, inside. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is working with federated identity providers. And here, we want to integrate some social media identity providers, LinkedIn, Facebook, things like that. Now, one thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go to LinkedIn and Facebook and create a developer account and create an app, because you have to take things like the app ID and secret and a callback URL, and basically, configure that over on the other side. Now, the way things work with user flows is that it's very easy to hook up an identity provider, but remember, you can't connect to Azure AD, Enterprise, you can just connect to social media, but what you'll see is that for each flow, you can decide, what's going to go inside there. So for instance, if I go up to LinkedIn, I created a LinkedIn developer account, and then it lets you create an app, and I gave that app a specific name. And then in the OAuth section, one of the things that you're going to have to do is, figure out what the client ID and client secret is. And then the other thing is that you have to make sure it knows the right callback URL. So here's something that you take and copy and bring back to Azure AD. The last thing is something that you get for Azure AD. You come here and you have to put in, the correct URL there. But basically it is the B2C, the B2C authority URL, which has the B2C login.com, then the resource URL, and then OAuth 2 and auth response. Okay, now once you've done that, you can simply come back, over here. Let's go back. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is let's come back here and notice that if I go and take a look at my identity providers, I've set up, basically LinkedIn, Microsoft personal accounts, live.com, and Facebook. And the idea is that all you got to do is come back here, and kind of put in the client ID. Okay, I'm going to have to go ahead and change that now that I've showed it in a public video. But also you can kind of see the callback URL. That's the one you kind of copy from here, and then you have to take to the LinkedIn app and paste that in. So here it's pretty easy. Open one of these, fill in what you need, and now let's go back to our user flow. In the last part of this demo is let's go to identity providers. Let's go down here now. We'll put those in. I'll go ahead and click save. Okay, so now I've got my hello world policy, with these 3 different identity providers. Let's take it one more time, and we're going to call this, and I can either click run user flow here. Another trick I like doing is to kind of copy to clipboard so I can go to a different browser session, where I'm already logged into something like, LinkedIn. So if we come back here, what I should be able to do is kind of put this link in. Now, this is now going to allow me to go to LinkedIn. And, now that I've gone to LinkedIn, this is something where this user's signing up right now. This user's had a LinkedIn account, but this is the first time that we're actually federating that user's LinkedIn account, inside of this B2C tenant. So what we're going to do is we're going to present the user with a dialog saying, hey, can you verify your first name, last name, and this right here, so maybe I'll put something like, LinkedIn here, just to note that's where I came from, but the idea is that now we can go through here, and now we get to this side. So now finally the other stuff is kicked in, so you can kind of see that we have display name now in the token. Sometimes names like display name get remapped in tokens. So it's called name. You can see we have the identity provider of LinkedIn, and you can even ask for a token. And the idea would be that then you could, as a developer, use this token to make a call, into the LinkedIn API, with that user's identity, and the user had to give away, some type of permissions inside there. So there are applications, where that can be used as well. Okay, let's keep going here. I don't want to get too far behind in the slides. So what we just looked at, was dealing with federated accounts. This wasn't the first time I had gone through and, used that LinkedIn account, as the federation integration point. But the first time each user does, they're going to get some type of a dialogue that's going to say this permission wants to do something on your behalf. You have to grant or allow, for us to go forward. Okay, and then what you saw is, we were able to get back here and, look at different things, inside of the token. Okay, now, next thing we're going to do is start looking at some code. And in particular, let's say that, we move over here to Azure AD, and, inside, I'm not in Visual Studio Code. So what I want to do is I want to run this demo application. And if I look at this demo application, what you're going to see here somewhere. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to that slide. I guess somehow a bunch of slides in. Okay. Here's where I made a mistake. I wanted to present this slide before the other stuff. So let's go ahead and do that. And once again, this didn't happen. This is all behind the scenes stuff. Okay, so I created a simple application and put it up on GitHub, and that's what we're going to look at right here. So what we want to do in this application is use, what Microsoft is going to recommend as your chosen security library, which is the Microsoft authentication library, which we call msal-browser.js. And so to use this, when you open it up, there's one file called auth-config, where you would need to make changes, to the tenant name, to the ID of the client application, and to the permissions that you have inside there. Now, let's go back here. And, we have this particular application right here. And let's go back over to a different user. Let's go back over to our buddy Austin. And Austin already has an account inside there. So as he comes up here, our application is kind of using the exact same thing, that we were using, as I was testing the flows, inside the portal there. And maybe we'll go ahead and click on the keep me signed in link now. But the idea is, that, as I make this call, this application, does nothing useful as far as users are concerned. This application is all about, going through the authentication sequence and then kind of displaying to you, the developer, so you can conceptually understand what's going on. Now, one of the things that this application does is allows you to click on token, so you can see exactly, what is inside the token. And here I can kind of see, gosh, we have a problem with name. It's not coming through correctly. There's Austin Powers inside there. Now, what I'm going to do here is let's go ahead and I'm going to go back to this application that I want to go back to this application right here. And I'm going to discuss what this application is in a second. But for various reasons, I'm going to go ahead and delete these accounts inside here. So now, as we come back here, let's once again kind of go through this process. And, as we go through this particular process, maybe this time, we'll basically say sign up now. And I'll go ahead and add in Austin one more time. One issue that we have here is I just kind of switched over from my user flows to the custom policy. So they kind of generate the user accounts not in the same fashion. So what we're going to do is we're going to create them one more time. Okay, so once again, we'll come here, we'll verify, and then as quickly as possible, I'm going to get through this. And so now, what is the given name? It's Austin. It is Powers, and then powers inside here. And now that we've kind of created this inside here, I've just kind of switched, from, over between two different things here, but what we can see is if I look at the token, there's the family name, and now I'm kind of using one that, is doing things the correct way, and kind of adding name inside the flow. Now, another thing that isn't obvious is that when you just use Azure AD, your authentication has an endpoint that's, not unique, but now every single endpoint that you're going to call to is going to have this policy name at the end. And so what I want to do now is let's kind of go through this process here in the sample application where I go into edit profile. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I want to edit profile and Austin Powers, and then we'll switch that to man of mystery, or I think the appropriate would be international man of mystery. Let's go ahead and continue. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of point out this complexity. And notice that this is a separate profile. And so now you have this case. I'm going to go back to identities. And when you're using the Microsoft Authentication Library, you have this idea of accounts and an accounts collection. And so this is the sign in, the sign up, sign in policy we care about. And so one of the things that can get you in trouble is that you do an edit profile and all of a sudden that is your active account, and that doesn't have, the same things in the token that this does. So what I wanted to kind of show here is an example, of writing some code, where inside of the code, let's go back to my slides, we're able to see that account. Okay, now just to walk through what happened here. What happened is, we redirected to this policy endpoint to start the authentication flow. And whatever happens, interacting with the user, that's up to the B2C tenant. I'm just patiently waiting for my access token to come back. Now, when you want to get an access token, you have to include scopes. That's going to be important. The B2C authority can provide whatever, interactive experience is necessary, given the behavior, of the policy that's executing. And if everything executes successfully, the access token gets returned back to your application, the relaying party. It then sends it, to your secure web API. Note that your secure web API trusts the B2C authority. So it's able to validate the token and kind of have the confidence that anything I see as a claim in the token is a fact, and I can use that for, basically doing my authentication. So here we had to create an application that was an SPA. So we need the application ID. We've configured it as a single page application, not the old style where SPAs needed implicit flow. So the single page application is more secure. And then also you have to, inside the application, since you want to pass access tokens, you have to create at least one scope. So going to the expose an API and creating that particular scope, and then you have something to add back in. So what I wanted to show there, is just this process of kind of going through and, being able to use this app just to inspect, what you're getting back in your token, and to do things like be able to kind of go through the edit profile flow, have it returned back, and to be able to kind of deal with two different accounts inside there. Now, I wanted to leave some code here, but this is code when you're using the Microsoft Authentication Library, the MSA browser, and you say get all accounts. If I kind of, move through here, you can see that if you call that and the account length is less than 1, that pretty much means 0. You ain't got nothing. There's nothing to do. If the account length equals 1, you only got one thing. Okay, I want to set that, as the active account. However, you can kind of see the logic down below here, and I won't step through it, but the logic basically says if there is a primary account that I need to be active and some other account is active, I'm going to step through there and resolve that problem. So once again, it's just one of the things that, can complicate things, but there might be one of those accounts with the correct policy that gives you, an access token you can't get from the other one. Okay. One extra thing here that we're going to do is, let's say that we go through here and we open up our friend Fiddler, and let's go ahead and log out. And now that I have logged out, we're going to, sign in one more time. And as we sign in here, remembered my first password, not my second. And, as we sign in here, did I put it back to the first one? Okay. Yes, I did. Okay. Now I'm fooling myself. Okay. Now that we finally signed in here, one of the things I want to point out here, is let's go back to Fiddler. You can kind of see, oh, okay, there's this one particular URL, where all these requests are coming in through. So maybe we'll go back here and we'll kind of turn the filtering on, so we can just see these inside. But what you can do is you can actually follow the steps, of where it starts the login up above here, and how you finally get the token back, here at the end. And notice that it's giving me an access token, the ID token, and the fresh token. And now for the cool Jedi Warrior tip of the day, you got an access token right here. You want to see what's inside of it. We go down here and we say send to text wizard. We come up here and we kind of get rid of that stuff that's before. And then all of a sudden from base 64, hey, I can go ahead and grab that. And now we can go ahead, and put that, inside here, and basically, start reading, what is inside the access token. Okay. So once again, I find that's just a very useful technique, as you're troubleshooting this type of, solution that you're building. Okay. So I've left the best to last, and we don't have that much time. So what I want to do here is there's something which is called the App Owns Data Starter Kit that some of you, might have used. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to this application, and this is an application right here that has access through the Microsoft Graph API to see my users. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of delete all these users, because what I want to do is I kind of want to run some tests and kind of see the self sign up experience right here. And so there is this live application that I have created right here. And so what I want to do is just kind of show, this extended version of the App Owns Data Starter Kit, that has B2C behind it. So we'll start by saying, I would like to log in. And so this time, and once again, I've kind of deleted the accounts because we're using different things. And just for demo purposes, I have to do this one more time. But what you're going to see is that my use of a custom policy allows me to get far more specific, about what is going into the access token. Okay, so back over here, let's go ahead and add those details. And then what you're hoping is the very last time in this session, I will put in Austin's details. And we have Austin and Powers. Actually, let's switch that to my friend Alex Powers. And now we have Alex, or Power Alex, as we like to call him on the team. Let's go ahead and choose create. Okay, so now this is the first account, that we're creating inside here, and what's going to happen is it takes a second to kind of go through this process on the back end. As it finishes, it's going to push me to this application, and it's going to use a token inside here. Okay, so there's user number one. Okay, well, let's go to user number two. So we have our buddy Max Smart, and Max Smart has a live.com account. So this is a preference account. And so, he's going to go through this process of, log in. And now he's going to choose the personal account. And what my custom policy is going to do is just kind of present, something where you can change your display name, first name, or last name. And so we'll give the user the ability to kind of change those, as the user is going through the sign up process. And now this user's in the system. Hey, that's great. Okay, now let's keep going through here. So now this time, what we're going to do is we are going to have a user who uses their Microsoft Work and School account. So this user can come through here, and same experience right here, is the last user came from live.com, the one before came from LinkedIn, but we're going through and we're still asking all users, to make sure that they like, how we have their display name, first name and last name, in the system. Okay, how about one more? Okay, yes. I regret that I once used Facebook. If we go back here, it seems like my account still works. So let's now kind of go through here, and we're going to log in. And now that we logged in, we should basically have now a bunch of different users. Now, finally, I can go back to this other application right here, and in this other application, which is the admin's data admin. What I wanted to show is that we can look at these B2C users, because we can use the Microsoft Graph API and just see, exactly, who has logged in. I guess to be complete, let's go back here and take my own user account, and we'll go through and we'll add them in LinkedIn. And what you're going to see, as we've created this set of custom policies, is that if I say view my account now, and if I kind of go all the way down here to the bottom and say show all claims and token, what we can see is that given my custom policy, I can guarantee that we have the email claim for any user. That email claim can now kind of be used, as the primary key, into the back end. Now, this is a live demo that anyone can use. And because it's a live demo that anyone can use, I felt the need to kind of put this last piece inside here, which is the delete my account. So if you use this, and let's go back here and kind of see, what do we have in these B2C accounts? As I go ahead and I refresh this right here. We have Ted Patterson from Facebook, and I say delete my account. It should now kind of go through this process. Is that spinning? No, it's not spinning yet. But the idea is it should go through the process, of deleting the account. Let's go to another user, and try the same thing. Go back to Austin's, say delete my account, and if I have everything working, the idea is a user can sign up and inject things, into my tenant. But if a user says get rid of my personal stuff, we want to be able to, handle that as well. Okay, now we're getting kind of close to the end here, but what you'll see is that the application I was just showing you, just uses the Microsoft Graph API to be able to look at those users. So you go to the B2C tenant and you create an app in there, and you're going to actually run as a service principal. So if you then give your application permissions for user read, write all, you can then authenticate as that service principal and read and write. And I just wanted to include in the slides, a look at that. Now, if you're developing custom policies, I'm going to spend 2 minutes just to show you how to get started. But this is a very steep hill to climb up. If you're developing custom policies, there's something called the Identity Experience Framework that defines things like XML schema, for how we define policies. And once again, reasons that I decided to go with a custom policy is I wanted to create the email claim and the token, because that's the way that, the Apple Starter Kit could work with it. And I also wanted to provide integration, into Azure AD tenants. If you wanted to provide integration into Salesforce, you would need one. And there are, many things. I feel like I kind of got to an intermediate level with custom policies. But I see there's all these things that if I dug in for a lot longer, I could do things like merge accounts. But once again, custom policy development, has a steep learning curve. Now, there is a getting started link But if you want to create custom policies, there's a bunch of boilerplate things that you have to do to create some Azure AD apps, in the tenant, get IDs and secrets and configure the custom policies for that. So this, is more than a tutorial. It's essential, configuration of how to get them up and going. Now, if you're going to use custom policies, the way it works is that you go and find a starting point from something called the Custom Policy Starter Pack. So what I did for mine is I started with social and local accounts, and there's just a bunch of files, that you are working with. And there is an extension, which is, the Azure AD B2C extension for Visual Studio. And it just gives you great stuff, like on the left, it gives you something called the Policy Explorer. So you can look through at all these entities. It gives you better IntelliSense. It allows you to hook into BDC traces. So once again, it's really valuable. I'm going to kind of end this section just by kind of talking about, at a high level, when you build custom policies, you're building journeys. And that's, think of it as an authentication flow. And the idea is that there's little steps. This thing's called claim providers and technical profiles, but I'm not going to get into the details of what's in the XML. But at a big picture, you're kind of taking the user through a sequence of steps, of what data needs to be collected for claims, what data needs to be verified, what data needs to be written, into the user store in Azure AD. And as you're going through all these different steps, you have this idea of a claims bag, and you're just basically adding claims in, and you're kind of making decisions on what claims that you need, where to pull them from, how to validate them, and ultimately what goes into the token at the end. Okay, I didn't do justice for that, but in fairness, there's no way I could do justice to developing custom policies, in such a small section. The last thing we're going to see here is that there's something which is called an API connector. And an API connector is that when a user goes through that sign up process, I can have that, basically fire an event handler. So an API connector is a callback function, and there's fairly limited usage of them with user flows, but if you're creating custom policies, you can put a custom connector in to validate, that a user should be added to the system or validate user input. What we're going to use it for here is that whenever a user goes through the sign-up process, we want to add a new record, into the App Owns Data database, to provide access, and we're going to send, a nice welcome message inside. So once again, if you look through of, working with custom policies, custom policies, there's just a lot more that you can do. Okay, here's some code that's inside there. Kelly is telling me I need to end, and I know that is true. I'm going to take.
We're going to continue until you finish this section.
Are we? Okay.
Just doing a time check for you, but
we're going to break the rules today. But as I move inside here, once again, this is just an extended version of the App Owns Data Starter Kit, and one of the things that you'll see is that both the admin and the web API, had to be updated, with Microsoft Graph Code. So if I looked into services of either of these, there is the, Microsoft Graph Code that's kind of interacting. And then also, down here at the bottom, there is the DevCamp B2C API connectors. So here's kind of an example of, code that is going to execute, whenever someone adds, something new inside here. Let's say I go back and since Kelly told me I can take 3 minutes instead of 1 minute, if we go back to the Azure portal. And so what I want to show right here is that once we authenticate, and then we are in the wrong directory. So we'll switch back over to kind of my primary directory. Okay, and now here is the function app, which is my connectors. And now, let's go up and look at functions. And this is kind of the quick way that I can kind of monitor, what has fired inside here. So what we should see is that I can configure things, so that when we have a new sign up and we look at these invocation details, you can kind of see that when they call out to this, we're able to do things, such as, put in the details such that we can get the email, the given name, the display name, and then, here's the code that's going to, put that user in the database. If the user, is brand new, instead of giving them no permissions, we're going to go ahead and put them, into this default tenant right here. Let's see who still has a default tenant. And the idea is that you can sign in, you can go through and kind of test out, both Power BI reports and a paginated report. I have my ugly report here, and then I have beautiful reports created by my Power BI CAT team colleague, Miguel Myers. And then I also wanted to kind of show a paginated report inside here. Okay, so at this time, I think I've been through all the things. I think won't push my luck because Kelly extended me a little bit of time, so thank you for that. And just remember that if you want to find one of the links, I think I went through about 8 links, that www.powerbidevcamp.net session 27, you can find that. So with that, I am now kind of finished with the material. And anything we want to do now, Kelly, to wrap up? Thank you so much for hosting, as always.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, we just appreciate everything you do for the community. It's amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We do have a link to the Power BI community blog for this session. So I'm just going to pop that in the chat. And if anyone has any questions, Ted, that they'd like you to answer, should they just go to this blog here that I've popped in the chat?
Yeah, that's a good place. If I click on that right here, let's see, is it showing now?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. So this is what you just put in. So this is just the blog that announced the session, talked about it. Yeah, so this would be a good place if you have questions, about getting started or different capabilities. I'd be happy to monitor that.
Okay, and with that, are you comfortable closing the session, Ted?
I guess I can. Thank you, campers, for attending. Our whole team appreciates you coming out, and whether you're seeing it live or kind of looking at the recording, thanks for your patronage, and let's all move together and kind of do great things with Power BI and it as a development platform. So thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. And as we always say, or as I always say, we'll meet you in the community. Have a great day.